Okay, everybody, I'm back, and this is the video that I promised in my SummerSlam review video. That was talking about the strength of the roll-up finish, or backslides and small packages, and any kind of pinning combination that you can think of, and why they work within the confines of professional wrestling, and why whatever I read that smart marks and reviewers of pay-per-views or whatever say that that's a weak finish, I disagree, and I'm going to explain why. Although I do feel the need to address, somebody brought up, one of my commenters on my last video brought up that the finish to the Ziggler-Miz match that I suggested in the review, apparently they did that on Raw. And I was like, oh, really? Interesting. Because my idea is that Ziggler should take a shot at Miz's face and Miz should cover up and then Ziggler should roll him up for the 3 count. Apparently they did that in a non-title match on Raw before SummerSlam. I have no memory of that, and that's kind of a sign of the overbloated content on Raw, is that just so much shit happens that it's almost impossible to remember it all. But I'm making excuses for my own stupidity and lack of memory. But in any case, you know, the finish I suggested, apparently they already did it, so I guess you couldn't repeat the finish at SummerSlam. But my statement to that would be, well, then they should have saved that finish for SummerSlam because it would have been the better finish. But, excuse me. But anyway, getting all that out of the way, pinning combination finishes like roll-ups, backslides, jackknife roll-ups, whatever you can think of, victory rolls, any type of finish like that in wrestling where a person gets a win with a surprise roll-up or some kind of pinning combination trap. And as I referenced before, I've read a lot of complaining and criticism about how those type of finishes are weak. And whenever they do a finish like that, it's considered weak, and it reflects on the reviews or whatever. And for me personally, I never understood that. And it's like, how is that a weak finish? I don't understand how that's a weak finish, because think about professional wrestling and what you're trying to do and the whole psychology of putting together a match. Part of that psychology is that you have to convince me that you are trying to win an athletic contest, and that can be tricky at times because you can go out there and just have the fakest looking fight ever, and nobody would believe in a million years that you're actually trying to win something. Even, so it's that's a very easy thing to screw up. Or you could do, or even if you're not over the top and cartoony, you can do a lot of things that take you out of the match. And I specifically remember one of the escape matches that TNA did. I think it might have been the first one, where it's supposed to be eliminations until it comes down to the final 2, and then the final 2 try to climb up out of the cage. A bunch of rules on top of rules that, lockdown resulted in, things like that. But I distinctly remember in that match, everybody was breaking up the pins. And to me, that destroyed the psychology of the match, because if it were one fall to a finish, it would make sense. But because it's elimination, it made absolutely no sense. And it's like, you're trying to win, right? Then what do you care if so-and-so eliminates so-and-so? It's one less person for you to worry about. Why would you break up the pin? It doesn't make any sense. So even doing things, tiny little things like that can take you out of, the overall psychology of the match. But looking at a professional wrestling match and what they're trying to accomplish, like I said, you're trying to convince me that you're trying to win an athletic contest. Okay. What are the methods of winning a professional wrestling match? If you're trying to win inside the ring, which everybody should, because winning by countout involves going outside, basically into the out-of-bounds territory, and that's basically, a countout is a different form of disqualification. But if you're trying to win inside the ring, which you should be, you're trying to win by either submission, which we're not really talking about here, or by pinfall. How do you beat somebody by pinfall? You beat them by pinfall by getting their shoulders down to the mat and holding them down for a count of 3. You can accomplish this by either beating them up so bad that they can't physically get up after the count of 3, which is what do people like to do. But in other cases, it just involves doing things like a roll-up, like a small package, like a backslide, like a jackknife roll-up, things of that nature to keep their shoulders pinned down to the mat. It's not about wrestling, or the the typical WWE match is not meant to emulate boxing or MMA, not necessarily, where a lot of times, well, I guess kickboxing would be better, because in MMA you are trying to force them down to the mat and get a submission. But, in things like kickboxing or boxing, that's about basically beating the shit out of people and just beating them into submission, basically. But with wrestling, if you can win by pinning their shoulders down to the mat, then things like backslides and roll-ups and small packages are valuable weapons in your arsenal because they allow you opportunities to do that, and you can hit them in the blink of an eye, and they can come out of nowhere, and if you pick the right time to do them, you can sneak out a win that way, and it's completely within the confines of the rule and accomplishes the goal of what you're trying to do, which is win a match. So I've never had a problem with that as a finish, because to me it makes complete perfect sense within, again, talking about psychology, within the psychology of telling the story of a wrestling match. You should be fighting like tooth and nail to keep your opponent's shoulders down for 3, and on the flip side, on the defensive side, you should be fighting tooth and nail to keep your shoulders off the mat at all times. That should be, to quote Archer and Kenny Loggins, that should be danger zone. I mean, if you're on your back, you should be like scared to death that you're going to lose. Again, if this were portrayed as like a real athletic contest, I think a lot of people shit on those type of finishes because it doesn't involve beating the holy hell out of somebody until you beat them down until they can't kick out at 3. But to me, it just makes sense for wrestling to do things like that, especially since the goal is to keep their shoulders down, pinned for a count of 3. And in a lot of cases, it can make for a fantastic finish that makes perfect sense within the story that you're trying to tell. I always think back to Savage and Steamboat at WrestleMania 3, and what they wanted to do with that match was create an exciting match where people didn't know what the finish was going to be. And back in those days, roll-ups and small packages and things like that were commonplace as finishes. And you go back and look at that match, it doesn't seem like much now, but back then, each one of those roll-ups, and I think there were about 20 of them, maybe more, each one of those roll-ups was a conceivable finish to the match, and that's why the crowd was so on their feet the entire time, because the match could have been over at any minute, and that's what made it so exciting. And you almost couldn't have that type of match exactly. It would have to be, I guess the equivalent of that today is a finisher fest, and as I've talked about before, I mean, those Cena-Orton matches that you see where it's just them trading finishers back and forth, I mean, that's just boring, and really, kind of, for the agents that put those matches together, it's kind of lazy and uncreative, I think. And roll-up finishes can be lazy as well if you haven't, set it up properly or anything else, and again, it's all about logically telling that story and logically putting everything together and making everything work perfectly and put it all into the right place. But I think back to some of Bret Hart's matches, and Bret Hart was kind of the king of the roll-up finish and making it just perfect. Just the perfect ending to those matches. His match with Diesel at Survivor Series 95, where he went through the table and he was practically unconscious, and Diesel felt sorry for him, and in a moment of weakness, he bent over and Bret was able to catch him and roll him up for the 3 count. That was a fantastic finish. Bulldog and Bret at SummerSlam 92, where Bulldog was able to roll him up and pin his legs down and keep him down. The pin looked inescapable, so it was a perfectly executed finish to that fantastic wrestling match, which is, that Bret Bulldog match is one of my personal favorites of all time, maybe even my number 1. I love the match that much, and I think that finish is great. And even finishing moves like the Perfect Plex. I remember when Bobby Roode was using the Fisherman Suplex, or I forget what he called it, the Payoff, that's what he called it. When he was using that as a finisher, clearly as a tribute to Curt Hennig, some critics and everything said that that's a weak finish for him. And I'm looking at that like, how is that a weak finish? It's not. And the reason it's not a weak finish is because, again, it's not the most devastating finisher in the world. It's not like this really powerful move that, feels like he's driving a guy through the mat or anything. But it works perfectly because it looks like an inescapable pinning combination if you hook it right. And this is where I miss Gorilla Monsoon, because whenever Hennig hit the Perfect Plex, he would make it. I miss that people would explain how moves make sense and everything. And he would talk about how with Mr. Perfect, when he would hook him over, when he would hook their leg and bridge over on the suplex, and he had the fingers locked, Gorilla explained it to where if he has the fingers locked, you're not getting out. And the pin is inescapable, and that's why that works so well as a finisher. So when Bobby Roode got bashed for having a quote-unquote weak finish, I kind of looked at it as like, how is that a weak finish? He's doing what he's supposed to do. He gets the pin. That's what you're supposed to do. I mean, that's kind of the whole, again, creating the psychology of making these, the athletic aspect of wrestling make sense. And that's why I never had a problem with the perfect plex or the payoff as a finisher, because to me, it's a perfect finish. And, pun intended, of course, but it just looks like an inescapable trap, and that's what you're supposed to do in wrestling. It's not about, that's not always about beating the holy hell out of the guy. It's about, that's why you hook the leg, because you want to reduce their ability to kick out. And that's why you hook the leg on pinfalls. And I don't know if a lot of the wrestlers today don't realize that, or if they think it's just something to do. But that's, it makes the pin harder to escape if you hook the leg. And it puts more leverage on them. Puts more leverage and more weight on the two shoulders on the mat. So it makes it harder to escape. And that's what roll-ups do. That's what schoolboys and small packages and backslides and jackknives and all that stuff. And makes all that stuff work and really enhances the athletic aspect of it while also keeping the goal in mind. And that's another thing. The ultimate goal is to get that 3 count, and if you use moves like that, it kind of reminds people of what you're trying to do and what everything's about, and what the whole story, what the whole goal of the whole thing is supposed to be from the get-go. And to me, if small packages and roll-ups and schoolboys and backslides never ended matches ever, then to me it would make no sense to do them. Because if they never work, then why do them? It does. I mean, even like some of the weaker holds, like chin locks and stuff like that, you can make the argument. It's like, yeah, you never win with it, but you're wearing the other guy down. Those roll-ups don't really do. I guess it makes him exert a little bit more energy, but not to the point that it would be worth doing. I wouldn't imagine. So, to me, people, the smart marks and everything will criticize those finishes and say that it's weak or whatever, but to me, I think if you do it right, like I said in those Bret Hart matches and the Savage Steamboat matches, it can be very creative and very exciting and perfectly fit the story that they're trying to tell, and it's perfectly acceptable in, a worked athletic competition where you're trying to make me buy into the fact that you're trying to pin the guy's shoulders down to the mat. And if that's your goal, then moves like that should be really exciting and really dramatic. And I think that those are perfectly acceptable finishers. But for years, ever since I've been on the internet, I've always heard about how that's a weak finish and blah, 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 and it should always be a big move or a finisher. And I guess that mindset has kind of led to the finisher fest thing, which I'm bored with, and especially when they do it at like WrestleMania, where you'll see matches at WrestleMania where guys will hit 2 finishers and they're still not convinced that that's going to be the end of the match, and they'll give no reaction to it. I was in the crowd at WrestleMania 29, and literally nobody reacted when the first finisher was hit, because we all knew the guy was going to kick out. It was just that Cena Rock match. I'm trying to remember what it was. It was either I'm pretty sure it was Rock hitting the Rock bottom first. I don't really remember. But I do remember that there was no reaction to it. I don't remember what it was exactly, but I do remember the reaction, which was none. And, so the whole finisher fest thing has gotten kind of boring to me, but I think if you incorporate those kind of roll-up finishes more frequently and find creative ways to use them and try to work them in a way that makes sense for the story, like that Bret Diesel match I talked about, I think it could work really, really well. And I've never had a problem with it as a finish. And whenever somebody reacts like, oh, he's getting buried if he gets beat with a roll-up or whatever, not really. No, he fell into a trap, or he got beat, or, he lost the way that one would lose a wrestling match, based on the rules that they've established for this fictional universe. I mean, people getting beat by roll-ups and pinning combinations is pretty much how you're supposed to lose. So, I never had a problem with it, but I'm always going to be reading criticisms for it, so I just wanted to put myself on the opposite end of the spectrum and explain why those finishes work for me and why they make sense to me. And basically, it's just because it fits the rule structure of professional wrestling. Unlike KO punches, like Big Show's punch, which does anybody remember that closed fists are supposed to be illegal? I mean, that rule just got thrown out the window, and nobody talks about it anymore. But you know, to each his own. But yeah, that's all I've got for now. I'll probably have another video up this weekend. But until then, y'all enjoy your week and peace out.